Hey guys, so today I'm going to talk to you about my poet, Ada Limon. And yeah, let's get started. So, a little bit of background. Ada Limon was born March 28th, 1976, in Sonoma, California. And she was greatly influenced by the visual arts and artists, including her mother, Stacia Brady. I can really tell that her mom did have an effect on her writing because as you read her poetry, you do realize that she talks about her Kentucky roots a lot, and she has a lot of imagery about horses. And I researched her mom a little bit, and Stacia actually took a break from the art world in the 1990s, and she became a ranch manager of a 40-acre horse ranch. They have such a nice bond that Stacia actually worked with Ada and helped her create the album covers for all her books. Ada is quite educated. After high school, she earned an MFA from NYU, the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center, and the Kentucky Foundation for Women University. And she's also the recipient of fellowships from the New York Foundation for the Arts. And as mentioned previously, she moved from Sonoma and settled down in Lexington, Kentucky. And she's just really grown up kind of in the country and uses a lot of that in her poetry and of her experiences out on the ranch and in little bluegrass fields. So it's very prominent in her writing style. Ada is the author of 5 books of poetry. The first 2 books she got out were Lucky Wreck and This Big Fake World. And she actually released these first 2 books the same year. So she said in interviews how she went from literally being unknown to having all this fame, relative to poet standards. And then she released Sharks in the Rivers in 2010, Bright Dead Things, which is my personal favorite, in 2015, and The Caring in 2018. The Caring actually won the National Books Critics Circle Award for Poetry and was named one of the top 5 poetry books of the year by Washington Post. Her 4th book, Bright Dead Things, was named a finalist for the National Book Award and also a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Going back to my favorite book, Bright Dead Things, I really like the way she named this collection of poetry because once you read through all of it, you definitely notice a big motif with light and images of fireflies, neon signs, and lightning. And I thought it was really cool that she kind of maintained that theme throughout the whole book. While putting Bright Dead Things together, Ada was actually diagnosed with chronic vestibular neuronitis, which, in layman's speak, basically she gets vertigo. And she says that her illness actually makes her appreciate poetry a lot more because when she's in the bouts of vertigo, she feels very sick, can't really move, just has to lie down in bed. But then when she has those moments of clarity, it's her mind immediately goes to writing poems. So poetry is kind of her escape from reality, almost her happy place. Most of her poems are autobiographical, and she does this not only to find answers in her own life, but help others kind of figure out their way through the world. In an interview, she said that the most important words for her aren't the ones that are written, but instead the words that say me too. So through her poems, she seeks not to provide answers, but to ask questions and reveal truth about life. And hopefully those questions and truths can help you kind of come to terms with yourself and to realize things about yourself that you didn't know before. Now, this is a really cool point she made. She said that she only really knows 2 prayers, and that's thank you and please, and that's what she bases her poems off of. And I think that's really cool because she's kind of putting her faith in God and leaving things to chance. And through her poems, she's either talking about things she's learned and she's thankful for, or she prays for help understanding the world around her. And this kind of reminded me of how Tim O'Brien writes as a coping mechanism for his trauma from the war. And this is just her way to cope with kind of the unknown and her own insecurities. So her style is definitely driven by her Mexican roots from her paternal grandfather, but she also identifies as Irish, Scottish, German. She also said part lion, part bear. So she's just very fluid in the way that she identifies herself, and I thought that was pretty cool. She also identifies with the divided self due to her parents' divorce. So, on one side, her dad is an elementary school principal, her mom was a speech pathologist. Like, they have very, like, set jobs. They have kind of like a more affluent lifestyle than compared to her mother, who is an artist, and her stepfather, who was a waiter up until she went to high school. According to Ada, this helped her have an expanded view of what it meant to be successful, because on one side, her parents were definitely happy having like a well-paying job, like a 9 to 5 work day, but then on the other side, even though her parents weren't necessarily like the richest people in the community, like they still loved her and they still had a fun time doing what they were doing. Like her mom Stacia loved painting and she loved her daughter, and for her that was like perfectly fine and that was success for her. Another theme very prevalent in her poetry is like wilderness and nature. And she says that she has a connection to the wild, but also to being alone. And so that she finds that when she is in nature, she can be very comfortable being herself. And it gives her a sense of like being alive. And she also really appreciates that she did kind of grow up after she moved from Sonoma. She grew up in Kentucky and she was like just surrounded by wilderness and like her mother's horse ranch all the time. And it really made her like feel very comfortable. Finally, she's also focused on the connection between womanhood, motherhood, and power. So her husband, Lucas, and herself tried to have children, but they couldn't do it just like naturally. So she had to take fertility drugs, which ended up making her vertigo worse. And because of that, she hasn't really been able to have kids. But she did say that she's happily child free and she calls herself a poetry mom. So her legacy in the world is actually her poetry, and that's what makes her happy. And she feels like she's putting all the love that she could have put into child into her poetry. And throughout her poetry, she just kind of explores how like versatile the term womanhood can actually be, and how she doesn't have to fit like the perfect cookie cutter wife like ideal with having to have kids and having to stay at home and like kind of be subordinate to her husband. Like she's very like adamant on defying that and writing about that in her poetry. And now I'm going to walk you through my favorite poem of hers, which is called Wife, and this was included in her most recent poetry collection, The Carrying, which was published in 2018. I'm not yet comfortable with the word. It's short, clean whoosh that sounds like life. So here, and you can see like throughout this picture that I highlighted the word. And this is kind of her labeling the idea of wife, and she's detaching herself from it. And the part where it says sounds like, it's kind of an illusion. Like, is this what she really wants? And then life. So it has like emphasis being at the beginning of the line. And I thought this is kind of her saying like, oh, this is my main focus. Like, I'm not really thinking about being a wife and like being owned by someone, but I'm thinking about living my own life. And also like, will being a wife define her? At dinner last night, my single girl said an admonition, it's not wife approved, about a friend's upcoming trip. So with single girls, I kind of thought Ada was referring to how other women are kind of brainwashed to think that it's an ultimate goal to become a wife. And talking about a trip, so a trip to me kind of signifies like freedom, like escaping, like moving away. And they're saying that basically like your freedom is not approved when you're a wife. And their eyes rolled up and over out of their pretty young heads being like, they're naive. Wife, why does it sound like a job? And then here, it's like an allusion to something we read earlier this semester. So it's the essay I Want a Wife by Judy Cyphers, and she kind of like quotes it in here. So, I need a wife, the famous feminist wrote, a wife that will keep my clothes clean, ironed, mended, replaced if need be. A word that could be made easily into made. Here I circled replaced, word, and made, and these three words kind of make women seem like they can just be thrown away and kind of discarded, and it really like objectifies them. And also the word maid and maid sound the same, which is like a homophone. So just kind of once again being like, you can be made into a maid. Like easily you can transform from being someone's wife to being someone's like caretaker. And then she continues, a wife that does, fixes, soothes, honors, obeys. And all of these like actions, fixes, soothes, honors, obeys, they all benefit like the partner, and it's not necessarily benefiting her. And she continues with housewife, fishwife, bad wife, good wife. What's the word for someone who stares long into the morning? So here, like, these are the expectations that like her husband would have for her. And with all like the different terms for wife, she's like categorizing them. And it's kind of like she doesn't want to fit in with a word and fit in with a category. She wants to be her own person. And at this point, the poem definitely takes a shift. So before, she's been kind of talking about how she doesn't want to be tied down, how the word wife is kind of like sickening. And then here it kind of turns more like self-deprecating in a way. So she's just kind of like looking at all her flaws. So someone who stares long into the morning, unable to even fix tea. Some days, the kettle steaming over like a train whistle, which again, like train whistle, going back to that escape journey that she kind of wanted to go on before. She who cries in the morning, she who tears a hole in the earth and cannot stop grieving. So here she's kind of like very like sad that she can't provide that for her partner, and she feels like she falls short of what she needs to be for him. And the one who wants to love you but often isn't good at even that, the one who doesn't want to be diminished by how much she wants to be yours. And at this point I got very confused because I was like super on that path of her being like, oh, I don't want to be a wife, like being a wife means being owned by someone. But then she starts using like the word wants, like wants to love you, wants to be yours. So I feel like at that point she was like contradicting herself, and I was definitely like pretty confused. But then I thought about it some more, and I kind of realized that she's talking about the difference between being owned and belonging. So when you're like owned, you're expected to work for someone, like, or you're expected to always like please them and kind of like lose yourself within that process. But belonging with someone, like in my mind, that's kind of having loyalty and commitment with someone. So she doesn't really want to belong to someone, but she wants to belong with someone and kind of like grow together. And that's why she wants to get married, and like why she would want to be a wife, and like why in real life she is a wife. If like, even though at the beginning of this poem she was kind of like, wife sounds like a job, like it doesn't necessarily need to be a job if she finds someone that she can belong with instead of being owned by them. Some other poems that you guys should read include Dead Stars, Before, The Other Wish, Cower, and How to Triumph Like a Girl. Thank you guys for your time, and I hope I kind of got you interested in reading some more poetry by Ada Limon.